Here we will be factoring trinomials. So kind of a trick here. You got to think, it's like a fill in the blank type of question. You want to be factoring this into two binomials. And if you look at the fact that that's an x squared, well, naturally that's going to happen from an x times x, right, for those first terms. So that kind of locks in the first terms. And then you look at kind of the last terms, right, and then think about how it relates to the middle term. So 6. 6 could happen from a 3 times 2, right? Or a negative 3 times negative 2, okay? But let's look at what happens if I distribute this. So the x times x, that's x squared. That's good. Then x times 2 would be 2x. 3 times x would be plus 3x. And then finally the 3 times 2 is plus 6. However, when I combine those middle terms, I would get x squared plus 5x plus 6. Oh, hey, look, that's what we originally had. So this would be kind of the check part, whereas that fill in the blank stuff is kind of like, it's a little bit of a trial and error, right? So this one, I actually got it right on my first guess. However, I could have accidentally tried this, and it's not a problem. What if I tried like 1 times 6? Okay, well, in that case, I would have the 1 times 6 is 6, but when you get to those middle terms, you would have had an x, and a 6x, right? 1 times x and x times 6, giving us a 7x in the middle, whereas we needed 5 like we had in this one, okay? So in this case, that would be a failed attempt, all right? So let's put a green box around the correct solution here, because sometimes you do guess and it doesn't work out, so you got to try it again and go from there. So let's do kind of the same thing here for the x squared minus 6x plus 8. So get my framework. I see an x and an x to get the x squared. Now for 8 could be 1 and 8 or 2 and 4, okay? Also, notice that middle term is negative. So in order to get a negative for that middle term, I would have had to have subtracted something in there to get a negative when you combine the like terms. So it turns out when you see that the last term is positive, that means that you're going to have the same sign. They're either both going to be positive or both be negative. But if the middle term is negative, then that means that these are both going to be negative. And then we got to get the right combination. Let me just talk through. If I try 1 and 8, well, negative 1 minus 8 would end up being negative 9. We want at negative 6 in the middle. So if I did 2 and 4, well, what's negative 2 take away 4? Oh, that actually gives me the negative 6. So I can think through my guesses and find that negative 2 and negative 4 are probably going to work. So this is our guess. And then let's check. So let's do the check part to make sure that this is correct. So if I multiply that out, you would get x times x, which is x squared. X times negative 4 would be minus 4x. Negative 2 times x would be negative 2x. And negative 2 times negative 4 would be plus 8. And when I combine those like terms, I do get my negative 6x, just like we had in the middle there. So our guess checks out. So this would be the solution to factoring this trinomial. Now it's a product of two binomials. So looking at the third example on here, you'll notice that the last term is negative. So that is only going to happen if you multiply a positive times a negative. So our factored expression kind of gives us that x and the x, but this time you're going to have 1 plus and 1 minus. And can you think of numbers that multiply to 56? Well, there's a few, technically, like 28 times 2. Let's see, 14 times 9. Yep, 14 times 9 would also work. But we're looking for numbers that add up to a positive 1. However, keep in mind 1 is positive and 1 is negative. So when I'm looking at 56, the first numbers that come to mind would be 8 and 7. And let's see if that checks out. The x times x, so here's our check. X times x is x squared, all good there. X times negative 7 would be minus 7x. And then 8 times x would be plus 8x. And then minus 56. And when I combine those middle terms, I actually do get negative 7 plus 8 would be 1. So that would be plus x. Oh, so I got lucky. I guessed that right on the first time. Sometimes you might, one's positive, one's negative. I might have wrote positive 7, negative 8. And then when you do that check solution, you would get a negative x in the middle and say, oh, I was close, just need to reverse it. So I have personally a lot of experience with these, so I kind of subconsciously run through some of those guesses mentally kind of as second nature. So, and you'll get to that point too after you practice a bunch. Let's go to the next slide. So this one's a little bit different because this time I don't have just a plain old x squared, okay? And so these get harder to guess now. There's kind of a guess and check method, but it gets harder to guess in this case. So let's think about our options and then try to find one that works. So if that was 2x squared, well, that would have to be like a 2x and an x. And then the 4 would be plus 1 times 4, right? So you might have something like a plus 1 and a plus 4. But without working that out, let's kind of think of some of our other guesses. This could have been x plus 1 and 2x plus 4. You see how some of those numbers, I'm going to kind of put question marks here, that might have been the configuration. However, you could have gone still 2x and x, but then instead of plus 1 and plus 4, you might have had a plus 2 and a plus 2. So you see, in this case, I've actually got a few different options that all have some of the right portions of a guess. I'm not just throwing out random numbers like, instead of like 1 and 4, I'm not doing like, 7 and 12. No, I'm trying to get numbers that multiply to 4. That would be 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. But then we have some other combinations with the 2x and the x or the x and the 2x. All right, so we need to check these. We're going to just multiply, right? Do our little FOIL claw method. So for that one, 2x times x would be 2x squared. 2x times 4 would be plus 8x. And then the next one would be plus x. And then plus 4. Oh, look at that. I think I got lucky again because that's 9x in the middle, just like we wanted there. So we got lucky again, getting it right in the first combination. However, you would find out when you check these, these would not check out properly. You would find something that wasn't quite right. Okay, one last example here. This is kind of a combination of a greatest common factor and then the factoring more of the trinomial, because right away I see that they all have an x that I could factor out. So this would be x times 6x squared minus 7x minus 5. Now double check that carefully. I factored out an x from each term, so it just reduces each term by one factor of x. All right, and the next step, you still have the x, but then we would want to try to figure out what's going in the parentheses for these two. This one's extra tricky because the 6x squared might be from 1 and 6, 6 and 1, 2 and 3, 3 and 2. So you see there's actually quite a few combinations. We're going to do our guess and check. We're going to guess it and check and see if it works out. So let's start with, say, 6x and an x. All right, that last term is negative, so that means 1 is plus and 1's going to be a minus. And then 5 would either be 1 and 5 or 5 and 1. I don't know. Let's try 1 and 5, okay? But this is a potential combination. All right, so let's check. You would still have the x. Oh, excuse me. I want to check, not factor anymore. I would want to multiply this out to check, okay? So I usually do the multiplying out off to the side. So 6x times x would be 6x squared. 6x times negative 5, that's negative 30x. And right away I'm seeing then that's way off, right? That's going to end up being minus 29x, not the 7x, negative 7x like we want. So right now I can just stop. Nope, that combination didn't work. So let's go back to the drawing board. Let's try a different combination. That seemed really pretty far off with that 6 and the 5 getting multiplied. So I think I might try to put the 6x plus the 5 together, and then the x minus 1. I'm going to try that because then I'm not going to be multiplying the 6 by the 5. All right, let's double check. This is just how you do these. 6x times x, that's fine, 6x squared. 6x minus times negative 1 would be negative 6x. And then 5 times x would be plus 5x. And actually right there, I can see that's not giving me negative 7 again. All right, so that's not working. I'm thinking the 6x and the x are the problem. So let's cross that one out. Go back to the drawing board again. Let's switch this up. Let's try to make those, say, like a 3x and a 2x, right? Because that would still give you 6x squared. One's a plus, one's a minus. And again, I think it's going to have to be, it's going to have to be a 1 and a 5. I just don't see it any other way. So I'll do 3x plus 5 and 2x minus 1. We'll just try these now. I'm optimistic on this one. I haven't checked fully, but I'm optimistic. 6x squared, right? 3x times 2x. And then minus 3x. And then plus 10x. And then minus 5. Oh, we are so close. Right? Negative 3x plus 10x. That's giving me 7x. I need a minus 7. So that right now, that tells me I've got one last one to check. This wasn't quite right, but it was super close. I'm just going to switch the plus and the minus from those. So this would be 3x minus 5 times 2x plus 1. Okay, I'm feeling good here. Here we go. 3x times 2x, that's 6x squared. We know that part. 3x times 1 would be plus 3x. Negative 5 times 2x would be minus 10x. And then negative 5 times 1 would be minus 5. And look at that. Finally, we got our minus 7x that we were needing from the beginning. All right, the minus 7x, highlighting that up in yellow, way back where we started. So it looks like we did finally get our answer. Just to make this clear, this one worked. Just to write a clear answer, since there's a lot going on here, the final answer would be x times 3x minus 5 times 2x plus 1. There's our final answer, and it's been checked out here in the margins that that's the right combination.